There's an Angel Secret Lair coming with Ardent Angel in it. It's a whole commander deck, it's one of the Secret Lair commander decks, but Ardent Angel is a reprint that we haven't seen for 22 years. But it was never originally printed in paper. It was actually a digital exclusive, mechanically unique card to a video game on the Dreamcast into Japan 22 years ago. And that's what we're talking about today. This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com. Use the link in the description below or the code KENOBI at checkout. Get 5% off your order, help support the show. And don't forget, I stream on Whatnot multiple times a month. There'll be links in the description below both to my channel, so you can follow me there where I give things away on my live streams and sell little bits and bobs. And you can get £10 of free credit if you sign up with the link in the description below of your first purchase. It's just free real estate. Links to Whatnot in the description below. The year is 1999, baby. It's September, and thus only a few months before the collapse of society as we know it and the end of the world at the hands of a giant insect called Millennium. What really strikes me as interesting is that some of the viewers of this video will be too young to remember the Millennium bug as a scary thing. People thought the world was going to end in 2000 because computers couldn't count to 3 zeros or some shit. Now, fast forward 23 years, computers are going to steal all our jobs and kill our dogs. The Dreamcast launches to much excitement in the West, a year after it had in Japan, and it has another 3D Sonic game in the form of Sonic Adventure 1, which isn't as good as Super Mario 64. But then again, what is? Mario 64 is a masterpiece. The Dreamcast is one of my favourite consoles of all time, with some of the most incredible bangers and trendsetters in all of video games. From Shenmue, to Jet Set Radio, to Power Stone 2, to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, to Crazy Taxi, the sheer number of absolute bangers on this system is wild when taken in retrospect. Of course, when it launched in Japan, it didn't have any games basically, and even when it launched in the West a year later, it was still a little bit sparse initially. But it had bigger issues than that. Sega had been struggling to capture big enough shares of the console market with its previous offerings like the Sega Saturn, and with the PlayStation 2 launching 6 months after the Dreamcast with some incredible marketing campaigns driving hype long before launch, and the promise of a built-in DVD player within the PlayStation 2 so you could take your home video to the next level. That's right, we're talking so old at this point, it feels like yesterday to me, but we're talking about the transition from VHS to DVD at an affordable rate. It's crazy. Some people watching this video are probably too young to remember when Blu-ray was a big thing for the PS3. By January 2001, less than 16 months after its release in the West, Sega announced the console was dead, and they were going to be winding down support and moving on to being a console-agnostic third-party developer. Some people heralded that as a good thing, because Sega had a back catalogue of genuinely solid game franchises that they wanted to see go elsewhere. Some of these fan-favourite franchises have finally got a decade or 2 decade later release in a new, shiny version, and they were dog shit. It's funny to look back on, actually, that people were excited for Sega's licenses to go to other consoles. Some things were good, Super Monkey Ball. Some things were not. Golden Axe. But as you can imagine, because games were still in development even when Sega pulled the plug on the Dreamcast project as a console, there were games that still needed to be released. So in the June of 2001, Magic the Gathering, the trading card game for the Dreamcast, landed on Japanese store shelves, and with no Western translation ever released afterwards, due mostly to the collapse of the support of the console. It was a single-player Magic title featuring a fully playable version of MTG, akin to and kind of the prototype for Duels of the Planeswalker, which launched 8 years later in 2009. There was a minimal story approach to it, easy computer components, and no multiplayer whatsoever, in spite of the fact that the Dreamcast was one of the earliest consoles to have full network capability so you could play online. I assume, I couldn't find the information on this, but I assume with the canning of the Dreamcast by Sega, some features just never really came to fruition, including both online or even just general multiplayer play, but also the fact that it never got a port to the West. The card pool was over 300 cards, featuring cards from Alliance's Tempest and 6th edition, with Doomsday, Armageddon, Winter Orb, and Mystical Tutor all being some of the hotter options amongst some true stinkers as well. But the most fascinating thing about the Dreamcast release of Magic the Gathering, the trading card game, is the 10 mechanically unique cards that were on that console that never came out in any other form. That's right, 2 full decades before we saw Jarsil or Crucius land on Arena and upset a vocal portion of the online community, Wizards of the Coast, or more accurately the development team of the single-player Japanese Magic the Gathering game for the Dreamcast, had made mechanically unique, unavailable to paper Magic the Gathering cards. There were 10 in total, 2 per colour, and the reason they never arrived in paper was because they all required some element of RNG that was processed via the computer system itself, and wouldn't be easy to replicate physically. I'd actually written into my script about how one of them, other than the Angel that we're coming to, would be easy to port to paper. until I realised there's only 6 sides to a 6-sided dice. The example I was going to give is Hapato's Might. This is a card that I really want to see this stellar art by Jeff Easley on a card again, but the card is an instant that gives +X +0, where X is a random number between 0 and 6. This could be almost replicated with a D6, but like I said, 0 and 6 means there's 7 options, which means, yeah, my original script was wrong. This means that Hapato's Might will be lost to the annals of Dreamcast history. A card that would be very difficult to bring to paper that I'd love to see is Lidari's Druid, a 3-mana 2/2 druid that when it enters the battlefield it permanently assigns land types to the lands in play. Now I don't know how this played in the original game, but it looks like it actually just like replaces the original land type. So for example, if you turned a mountain into a forest, then it would mana screw your opponent. That mountain can no longer make red mana, it can make green mana, so your mono red opponent could be stuck without any mono red mana. It doesn't clearly tell us in the translation on Scryfall, for example, whether or not this replaced the original type or was an addition to it, but rules as written, if I were to read this card in a game of Magic, I would assume that it replaces as opposed to goes in addition to. I kind of love this idea of a randomized Makers of the Moon that hits the battlefield and every land just gets randomly blipped to be a different land type. I mean, if you had an Ancient Tomb or a Wasteland or something that doesn't have a land type already, it would gain 1, so it wouldn't lose its initial ability. But if you had, like I said, a forest losing the forest type to become a mountain, it would no longer produce green. But trying to arbitrarily decide between the 5 or 6 basic land types, if we include wastes in that for every land in play, would be kind of impossible. So the cards are largely this like RNG element that is kind of just arbitrarily there because they could with a computer. Saji's Torrent taps a random number of creatures arbitrarily between 0 and 5, which I think is kind of funny. The one they've brought back wholesale is this, Ardent Angel, complete with the Greg Staples original art. It chooses a number between 1 and 4 randomly, and if 1 is chosen, it reanimates from the graveyard in your upkeep. Easily done now with the ability to roll a 4-sided dice. Bear in mind, for years we had coin flips, but we had no dice rolling in Magic the Gathering. It's been added in more in recent times, and it's allowed them to open up and reprint a card from 22 years ago from the Dreamcast game. Now this is the first ever example of a card referencing a D4, a 4-sided dice, which is pretty cool, and it's a fun oddity. But the idea of bringing back a 22-year-old deep cut from the Japanese Dreamcast version of Magic the Gathering is exactly the weird boomer trivia I live for. It makes me all warm and fuzzy inside. Personally, I would love to have seen a set symbol that somehow evoked the Dreamcast or the old DC that they had, and I would love to have seen it in the old border too. But one of the sweetest details of all of this is the flavor text. Cast from dreams and forged in hope. It's such a wonderfully cute reference to the fact that this comes from a Dreamcast game. It's a little bit of Magic trivia that, like I said, it makes me feel happy. Will the others ever see physical card printings? Probably not. There is one that's close. Kamato's Scout needing a random one of the basic land types to gain that land walk means that it has 5 basic land types of the 5 colours plus wastes. That's 6 options. So you could codify and write onto it that you roll a 6-sided dice with each number corresponding to a basic land type. It would be a lot of text, but it could show up. I just don't know if it ever will or should or if it even matters. I hope you enjoyed this weird oddity, this little deep dive into a weird part of Magic's history that they recently made reference to in a secret lair. I love it. Let me know in the comment section below, are you buying the Angel Secret Lair? And don't forget, if you want to support the show, check out the links to whatnot in the description below and get £10 off your first order. It's just free fucking money. Take the offer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.